2020 was filled with many hurdles, questions, and difficulties because of the pandemic. The FDA is now warning us about potential COVID-19 vaccine scams. It's also tax season, where tax ID theft is on the rise. What's the best way to avoid being a victim of tax ID theft? We'll discuss these questions and concerns with our guest today on BBN's Weekend Connection. So, get connected with us. Join us for part 2 of our discussion with our guest today. My guest again today is Eva Velasquez, president of the Identity Theft Resource Center. ITRC is a nonprofit organization established to empower and guide consumers, victims, business, and government to minimize risk and mitigate the impact of identity compromise and crime. Eva, welcome again to our program today to bring us up to date on how thieves are leveraging the current COVID landscape.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, for having me back. I'm really pleased to be here.
So, Eva, 2020 was filled with many hurdles and questions and difficulties because of the pandemic, and ID theft showed itself through the filing of unemployment benefits. What kind of an increase did we see last year?
You know, this is really a sad statistic, but for the ITRC, we saw an increase that was in the thousands of percent, something like 5,000%.
My.
So to give your listeners kind of some context behind it, the use of someone else's identity credentials to apply for government benefits and services has been around for a long time. And using someone's credentials to apply for unemployment benefits has been around for years. In 2019, we received 19 calls on the issue. So something that happens, but not a huge problem. One of the reasons is it's not particularly lucrative for the scammers, and it can be, depending on the state, those authentication processes, the fact that you had to go into the office personally, maybe show your ID and authenticate yourself. Those were some hurdles. In 2020, the landscape completely changed. It became much more lucrative. Because of social distancing and health and safety requirements, a lot of those authentication processes were either reduced or absolutely eliminated. And because of the state of data breaches, we've had so many data breaches in the last decade and a half that a lot of our data was already out there. And so the thieves were able to use that existing data to just hammer these state systems and apply for those benefits. So 2019, we had those 19 calls. In 2020, we had over 900, and it's still going. As of today, we are well over 1,000, probably over 1,100 at this point. The Federal Trade Commission saw a monumental growth. All of the states are reporting how big this problem is. The officials are estimating that we're looking at $63 billion with a B in fraud losses across all of the states.
Well, that leads us to the ID theft in the SBA loans, the Small Business Administration loans, and I understand that this type of ID theft takes different forms of which businesses and consumers should be aware.
It absolutely does, and there is a little bit of confusion, consumer confusion, where people say, well, I don't own a business, so I can't be a victim of this particular type of fraud. And unfortunately, that's not the case. If you have a Social Security number, if you have those identity credentials, you can be a victim of the SBA loans, because those loans were not only made available to corporations, people with LLCs, they were made available to small business owners. So people who have like a sole proprietorship, for example, where they don't have that EIN number, that separate identifier, they're simply using their personal Social Security number because they're a sole proprietor. And those loans, you were eligible to get those loans were given. And so just like unemployment identity theft, if the thieves had your identity credentials, they would just make up a business, Eva's heirloom farms, and I have a small business and I grow, heirloom vegetables on my property and sell them, and I'd like a $10,000 SBA loan. And unfortunately, that fraud got through, and those were granted. And now that the payments, in some cases, it's time to start paying those loans back, people are getting notification that, hey, it's time for you to start making this payment on your SBA loan. And they're going, I don't even own a business. I'm retired, or I work somewhere else, or I'm a homemaker and I don't work outside of the home. I don't own a business. Why am I getting this? That's what happened.
We're talking about COVID-19 related ID theft and tips to protect yourself in 2021. This is Weekend Connection, and my guest is Eva Velasquez, president of the Identity Theft Resource Center. Eva, I understand that Facebook and Instagram users are being targeted by cyber criminals. Now, what is this all about?
Oh, my goodness. This is the fake grants, fake economic relief programs that are making their rounds through Facebook and Instagram again. This is one of those things that's sort of a recycled scam, so to speak. The fake you qualify for these grants types of messaging coming through social media, again, has been around for a long time. What makes these scams particularly dangerous is that right now we do know that there are COVID relief programs. We've heard on the news that here's this economic stimulus, here's this relief program, you may qualify. There is some truth to this. There are programs that exist to help people. So when you get the message on your social media that you qualify, you don't automatically say, oh, well, that's a scam, those things aren't real. These programs are real. But I can tell you that they're not sending you direct messages through Facebook and Instagram. If you are eligible for one of these grants, I sound like a broken record, but please go to the source. Go and look up online at the government websites what the particular grants and what the particular relief programs are and how they work, and see if you're eligible. Most of it is coming, that eligibility is coming in the form of things like those SBA loans, like the increased unemployment benefits. But there are a few other things, so we don't want people to be confused and think, okay, well, I know there are some of these relief programs, so and I must be eligible. This is great. You might be, but it's not going. That message is not going to come through Facebook and Instagram. So please don't believe it when they tell you, please click here and apply and give me all of your data. And oh, by the way, can you pay some upfront fees in the form of iTunes gift cards?
Eva, people are online so much more these days, obviously working at home and shopping online and avoiding ID theft. You suggest we should get our antivirus software updated. Address this, would you?
Oh, yes, please. I think that we have done a good job in getting people to understand that their computers need to have both the antivirus software, and it will also detect malware, and to do patching. When those updates come out and it says, hey, you've got to, patch this, do you want to do these updates? I really want to encourage people, please do those right away. Those patches are addressing known vulnerabilities. So not only does the company, the organization and the platforms know that these are vulnerabilities, you better believe that thieves know it. So you're in a race against them to patch those known vulnerabilities before they can exploit them. So please do that right away. And then we also want people to realize that, your phone and your tablets, we use them all the time. In some ways, they have more data than our laptops and our desktops. They have so much information about us. So please treat them the same way you would treat your computer. That's what they are. They're small computers that we hold in our hands. And doing things like getting antivirus software on all of your devices, not just your computers, but your phones and your tablets, that can be very helpful. And also just doing the updates on your devices. When there's a system update, when Apple puts out, hey, we're going to the next version of iOS, please go ahead and do that update right away because, again, it's addressing known vulnerabilities.
How often should we change our passwords? And is there a password that's too difficult for a thief to crack?
I'm so glad you asked me that because, look, if there's one thing your listeners take away today, it's that good password hygiene can do so much to reduce your risk across the board.
Mm-hmm.
It is one of those active consumer protection steps that you can take that meets so many needs. So and things are changing. This is a very dynamic space. So you may have heard some of the wisdom of let's change your password every 30, 60, 90 days and have it be the gobbledygook that's just a bunch of nonsensical characters. And what we have learned is that that's actually not the best way to go. It's not bad, but it makes it very hard for people to remember. And then what do? We default to using easy passwords and the same password over all of our accounts.
Mm-hmm.
So the important thing to remember is use a unique password across all of your different accounts. I know that's challenging, but make it something that's memorable only to you. It could be a song lyric, a line from a poem, a favorite TV show. You want to make sure that it's 12 characters or longer. And when you start adding things like it's 12 characters, longer than 12 characters, I have some uppercase and some lowercase, and I've thrown a number or a symbol in there, it takes like 48,000 years to crack that password versus if it's only 5 characters long and it's just one word, it's instant. They can instantly crack that with programs. Every word in the dictionary, they have programs that can run through that very quickly and instantly crack your password. So just make it a string of characters. And then you don't have to update it as frequently. Really, the only time you need to change it and update it is if you've become aware that there's been a breach or that account's been compromised.
We're talking with Eva Velasquez, president of the Identity Theft Resource Center, on Weekend Connection today on BBN. As we're coming to the close of our time together, Eva, I thought we would briefly address this thing about the credit report and fraud alert or credit freeze. What's the difference, and is one or the other better than the other?
Well, there is a difference between fraud alerts and credit freezes. The primary difference is that with a fraud alert, when you place that on your credit file, the lenders are now required to do some form of additional due diligence. So I have a fraud alert. Oh, the lender actually has to now get in touch with me. They need to call me and say, is this you? So yes, they can be useful. They can be particularly useful if you are in the market and applying for new credit and you don't want to have to deal with freezing and thawing your credit. But I am going to say from the ITRC's position, we recommend freezes. We recommend that everyone freeze their credit. And the reason is, now it's free. There was legislation that was passed a couple of years ago that makes it free for anyone. And that includes kids. Parents, you can do this for your kids. And it isn't as challenging. When in the old days, a decade ago when we were going through this, it was a lot more cumbersome. And it was a little bit harder to manage because you didn't know exactly when the freeze was going to lift. And if you were maybe trying to buy a car or something, it could be a real inconvenience. Those days are over. It is a really seamless process. And when you freeze your credit, you essentially are freezing out everyone from opening new lines of credit. Now, that includes you. You have to thaw it before you can actually open new lines of credit using your legitimate credentials in your own name. But that's okay because you're freezing everyone else out. And, I just talked about the passwords and good password hygiene being one of those things that if you're only going to do a couple of things, that you'll get a lot of bang for your buck. And credit freezes are the same thing. It's not a panacea. It doesn't stop every type of identity theft, and it doesn't, cure all of the problems. But boy, does it have a big impact. Because if your credit is frozen if someone does try to apply for a new loan, a new credit card in your name, they simply cannot unless they have the PIN and they're able to file the credit. And as long as you're guarding that and making sure that you aren't sharing that and treating that, as the valuable PIN number that it is, it can really have a big impact on reducing your risk.
And Eva, tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe we can access our credit reports weekly now through the end of April. Am I correct in that?
Yes. At the moment, right now, you can access them weekly through the end of April, and that is free. There's no cost. That may or may not be extended. We'll have to wait and see. But checking your credit on a regular basis is such a good idea, because it not only can help you catch an identity theft issue early, it's also just a good financial literacy practice, because sometimes these errors can be simply that. They're errors. It's a typo, and you can have those things fixed and addressed. But it's also such a good indicator if you start seeing accounts that you don't recognize, then you can address them. Waiting, a lot of people would like to or think, I'm just going to check my credit score instead of actually checking my credit report. And if you're doing nothing, checking your credit score is better than nothing, certainly. It can be useful, but it's not as useful as checking your credit report, because there's a time lag. These accounts they may affect your score a couple of numbers here and there, but it's not until they go into arrears and go into collections and go into late payments that they start having the big noticeable impact on your score. So there's a time lag there. And I think it's important for people to understand that before they decide, okay, I'm only going to look at my score and not check my credit report.
We have been talking to Eva Velasquez, president of the Identity Theft Resource Center. And thank you, Eva, for getting us caught up in all of the COVID-19 related ID theft and reminders about protecting ourselves here in 2021.
No, it was my pleasure to be here. I hope we educated some folks and let them know what to look out for and where to go if they need help.
Thank you, Eva. And this has been Weekend Connection on BBN.
Thank you for listening to this feature, a production of BBN, the Bible Broadcasting Network. BBN provides 24-hour Christian programming, great Christian music, and Bible teaching. Listen to BBN by clicking the link in the description.